the storm that swallowed her. The twin suns of planet Zareth hung heavy in the orange sky. The sand shimmered like fire. The wind was quiet, but only for a moment. In the distance, dark clouds of sand began to rise, twisting and rolling like angry beasts. Zara ran. She was just a girl of 16 cycles, her small legs struggling in the deep dunes. Her skin was pale gold, her eyes bright violet but filled with fear. Behind her, the sky darkened. The sandstorm was coming fast, faster than any storm her tribe had seen before. Her tribe had left her. They ran when the raiders attacked the Yo village. Zara had gone back for her younger brother, but he was gone. No one waited. No one came back for her. She was alone now, and the storm was going to eat everything. Zara looked back. The wall of sand was a monster, tall, roaring, endless. It was not wind anymore. It was alive. It howled like a beast hunting prey. She tripped. Her foot sank into a hidden hole. She fell hard, rolling down a dune. The sand scratched her skin, filled her mouth, her nose. She coughed and cried out, but her voice was lost in the wind. She tried to stand, but her leg hurt. Badly. Twisted or broken, she couldn't tell. The pain was sharp and hot. The storm was almost here. She pulled a thin cloth over her face and lay flat, trying to hide behind a rock. But there was no real hiding. The storm reached her. The first wave of sand hit like knives. It pushed her back. The next wave buried her knees, then her waist. She tried to dig herself free, but her arms were weak. Her breaths were short. Her heart beat fast, then slow. She whispered her brother's name. The sand covered her eyes. Everything went dark. Far away, a human named Mark was walking. He was not from this world. His ship had crashed here 3 days ago. He had no help, no contact, and little food or water. But Mark was a survival expert. He had trained for every kind of environment, except Zareth was worse than any desert on Earth. His boots sank into the hot sand with every step. His eyes searched the horizon, looking for shelter. Then he saw something strange, a broken piece of cloth half buried in the sand. He walked closer. Then he saw a hand, small, thin, pale gold. He dropped to his knees and began digging. The sand was thick, heavy, and hot, but he kept digging. His gloves tore, his fingers bled. Still, he did not stop. Then, her face. She was young, not human, alien. But she was still a girl, and her body was cold under the burning sun. Mark felt for a pulse. Nothing. He pressed his ear to her chest. A faint beat. He quickly pulled out a small oxygen mask and placed it over her mouth. He gave her water drop by drop. Her chest moved. Once, then again. She was alive. "Stay with me," Mark said, though he knew she could not understand his language. He wrapped her in his emergency blanket and lifted her in his arms. She was light. Too light. She had not eaten in days, maybe longer. The storm was moving away now, its anger thrown across the land. But the sun was falling, and night in Zareth was deadly cold. Mark found a small crack in the rocks nearby, enough for one person. He squeezed in with her, covering the entrance with heat cloth to block the wind. Zara lay beside him, barely breathing. Mark opened a heat pack and placed it near her chest. He wrapped her tighter, and then lay beside her, his body keeping her warm. She moved slightly, her eyes blinked once, slowly. She saw him, a stranger, a human, covered in dust, eyes like the Earth's sky, blue, calm, and strange. Her lips trembled. She tried to speak, but only air came out. "Shh," Mark said softly. "You're safe now," but they were not safe. Night was coming. The desert monsters hunted in the dark. Mark checked his small knife. It was not enough. He knew he had to stay awake. Beside him, the alien girl slept. Her heartbeat was weak but steady. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story, but he had saved her, and that meant he would protect her now, no matter what came next. A sound broke the silence of dawn. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the whisper of sand. It was a strange sound, slow, deep, breathing. Zara opened her eyes. For a second, she forgot everything. She forgot the storm, the pain, the fear. Warmth wrapped around her like a cocoon. Then she saw him. The human. He was still awake. His eyes, blue like a clear sky, like the stories the old ones told of stars far away, looked down at her. He was tired, his face dirty, lips cracked from heat and cold. But he smiled when she woke. "You made it," he said softly, knowing she didn't understand. Zara stared at him, confused and weak. His voice was calm, almost like music. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her leg. She gasped and fell back. Mark gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Easy, you're hurt." Zara didn't know what the words meant, but the tone was clear, soft, kind, not a threat. She looked at the blanket around her. She had never seen this kind of fabric. She looked at the strange silver packs near them. One was warm. Another was filled with water. He offered her a small metal cup. She hesitated. In her tribe, nothing was ever given without a reason. But then, she remembered the cold, the storm, being buried, dying, and he was the one who pulled her out. She took the cup with shaking hands and drank. The water was clean. It had no sand, no bitterness, just cold, pure life. She looked up at him again. "Who?" she whispered. He touched his chest. "Mark," he said. She blinked, then pointed to herself. "Zara." He smiled again, repeating her name. "Zara." Later that day, Mark helped her out of the rocky shelter. She couldn't walk well, so he let her lean on him. They had to move. The area was not safe. Mark had seen strange tracks in the sand, giant claw marks that didn't belong to any animal he knew. Something had been near them during the night. Zara looked around as they walked. The desert was quiet, but that didn't mean it was empty. This place had rules and dangers. They walked slowly across the dunes. Mark used a scanner on his wrist to search for his crashed ship, but the signal was weak. His gear was almost out of power. Time was short. Zara pointed toward a dark spot on the horizon. "What is it?" he asked. She said a word in her own language. He didn't understand, but her eyes told him it was important. So they changed direction and went that way. As they moved, Zara began to speak in short, broken words. She pointed to things, saying their names. "Sarak," she said, pointing to a cactus-like plant. "Kendu," pointing to a sharp rock. She tapped her chest again. "Zara." Mark smiled and pointed to himself again. "Mark." They were building a small bridge between two worlds, one word at a time. But that small piece didn't last. As the twin suns reached their peak, Mark spotted something in the sand. Burnt wood, broken stones, shattered pots. A village, or what was left of it. Zara stopped. Her eyes widened. She fell to her knees and touched the blackened sand. Tears ran down her cheeks. This had been her home. Mark stood back, silent, letting her feel. Then she reached for him, gripping his arm tightly. She spoke fast now, in her language. Words, full of pain, fear, and desperation. Mark didn't understand, but he could guess. Her family, her people, gone. He knelt beside her and placed his hand on her back. She cried, not loudly, just soft, broken sobs that shook her small frame. When she looked up at him again, her eyes had changed. She wasn't just a scared girl anymore. She was someone who had lost everything. And now, he was all she had left. Night came again. They found another small cave and built a fire using dry roots Mark had collected. Zara stayed close to the flame, eyes wide. Then Mark pulled out a device, his tablet. The screen lit up, showing pictures. He opened a map of stars. Zara gasped. She pointed at one of the lights and said something in awe. He showed her pictures of Earth, green forests, blue oceans, tall cities. Her eyes widened. She had never seen anything like it. She touched the screen gently. Then she took the stick she was holding and began drawing in the sand. Circles, triangles, a rough map. Mark watched closely. She was showing him something. A place, a hidden place. Maybe survivors? And that's when he heard the noise again. Not wind, not Zara. Something was outside, something big. Mark grabbed his knife and moved slowly to the cave entrance. Zara froze, eyes locked on the darkness outside. And then, they both heard, at a low growling breath, something was hunting them. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, but the look in her eyes said everything. As the deep growl echoed outside the cave, Zara turned to Mark, her violet eyes wide with fear, but also with one desperate message. Help me. Mark tightened his grip on the small knife in his hand. It was a weak tool against something large, but it was all he had. He slowly moved toward the edge of the cave, pressing his back against the wall. The fire behind them flickered, casting long shadows. Zara stayed crouched low, clutching a sharp rock she had picked up earlier. The growl came again, closer. Sand shifted. Something was outside. Then, silence. Mark waited. His heart pounded in his chest, his ears strained, still nothing. He stepped forward slowly, peeking outside. The dunes were quiet. The stars above Zareth blinked softly. The wind had calmed, but something had been there. He could feel it. He turned to Zara and gave a small nod, trying to look calm for her sake. She stood shakily, never taking her eyes off the entrance. Then she did something he didn't expect. She took a stick and drew in the sand again. 2 circles, a line between them. Then a large X over one side. Mark watched. She pointed to herself, then pointed at the smaller circle. She was trying to tell him something. A direction? A place? He showed her his tablet, pulling up the map again. She pointed to a spot, then to her drawing. Her people had moved. They might be alive. Mark nodded. We go there, he said, not knowing if she truly understood. But Zara's expression softened. She touched his hand gently. That was enough. By morning, they were moving again. Zara limped, her leg still in pain, but she didn't complain. Mark had tied a splint using cloth and metal rods from his kit. She leaned on a stick and walked slowly beside him. The desert sun was brutal again, but Mark rationed their water carefully. 1 sip for her, 1 sip for him, then nothing for hours. They crossed old bone fields. Giant skeletons of long-dead creatures lay buried halfway in the sand. Zara avoided them, muttering small words, prayers or warnings. Mark could only guess. Soon, they reached a tall rock formation. It stood like a tower in the middle of nowhere. Zara pointed to a crack at the bottom. Inside, it was cooler. Dark. Silent. Zara lit a glow stick Mark gave her. Together they stepped in. The walls were covered in carvings, strange symbols and images. Some looked like her people. Others looked human. Mark frowned. What was this place? Then he saw a symbol, an ancient warrior wearing boots like his. Zara looked at him, then at the carving. Her eyes sparkled. He was standing in her legend. Further inside, they found something hidden, a small chamber, sealed by stone. Zara pressed her hand to it. Nothing happened. Mark touched it. The stone clicked. It opened. Inside was a skeleton, old, wrapped in golden cloth. In its hands was a glowing stone. Zara stepped forward and dropped to her knees. She spoke softly. A prayer. Then she turned to Mark and held out the stone. He shook his head. It's not mine. But she insisted. He touched it. The stone glowed brighter. A low hum filled the room. Suddenly, markings on the walls lit up. Lines, stars, and directions. It was a map. Zira's eyes widened. She touched her chest, then pointed ahead. This was the way. As they left the chamber, the desert growl returned. But this time, it was above them. The roof cracked. A massive claw slammed through the stone, and sand exploded around them. Mark grabbed Zira and pulled her back. The cave shook. They had no time to hide. A long, scaled creature slithered into view, part reptile, part machine. Its eyes glowed red. It had followed them. Zira stood frozen. Mark pulled her behind him, holding the small knife like it could stop a monster. The creature roared. Zira reached into her pouch, pulling out the glowing stone. She raised it high. The creature paused. It hissed but did not attack. Then it backed away slowly, disappearing into the sand once more. Mark stared at her. What was that? Zira didn't answer. She didn't speak his words. But her eyes turned to him again, and this time they weren't just asking for help. They were offering trust. Zira was dreaming. But this dream was made of dust and fire. She walked through the sand, hearing voices of her people calling, crying, whispering. She turned but saw no one. Then bones began to rise from the ground, tall skeletons glowing with old energy. They were warriors holding weapons carved from crystal. They pointed at her, then vanished in a wave of ash. She opened her eyes. The dream was gone. But the bones were real. Zira and Mark stood at the edge of a massive dune crater, hidden deep within the desert. Below them, buried in silence, was a graveyard. Thousands of bones lay scattered, some huge, some small. A broken civilization. Mark looked down in shock. What happened here? Zira didn't speak. She simply started walking. Mark followed, carefully stepping around cracked skulls and shattered armor. Some skeletons had long horns, others had multiple arms. This was not just her tribe. This was something older. They passed a cracked statue. The head was missing, but the body wore a robe like Zira's people. Zira placed her hand on it, closing her eyes. Then she pointed toward a large stone arch half buried in sand. Beneath it, carved deep in alien symbols, was a warning. Those who enter must not wake the guarded. Mark couldn't read it, but Zira could. She stopped, biting her lip, then looked back at him, uncertain. He stepped beside her and gave a small nod. Let's go. They crawled through the stone arch, entering a hidden passage. Inside, the air changed. It was cooler, heavier. Strange blue light glowed from moss-like plants on the walls. Zira picked up a torch-shaped crystal, and it flickered to life in her hand. Mark scanned the area with his tablet. No signals, no energy spikes. But he noticed something. No animals, no bugs. No sound. Only their footsteps. As they moved deeper, they saw carvings again. This time, detailed pictures of a war. One side looked like Zira's people. The other side wore helmets like humans. Mark paused. His heart beat faster. Had humans been here before? At the heart of the ruin, they found what looked like a temple. A giant door stood shut, covered in dust and vines. Zira stepped forward and placed her hand on the center. The door responded. Stone gears turned. Dust fell. With a slow groan, the door opened. Inside was a vast hall lined with broken pillars. Statues lay shattered, but at the end of the hall, on a raised platform, sat a throne. On the throne, a large figure rested, its body made of both bone and metal. Its eyes were closed. Zira's breath caught in her throat. Mark stepped forward. The moment his boot touched the center of the room, the figure's eyes flashed open. Bright yellow fire. It rose. Zira screamed, pulling him back. The creature, the guardian, was awake. The guardian's voice boomed, but not in words Mark understood. It spoke in Zira's language. She dropped to her knees, speaking fast, her voice shaking. She held up the glowing stone. The guardian paused. It stepped down slowly from the throne, towering over them. Then it looked at Mark, its head tilted. It raised a clawed hand, and placed it gently on his forehead. For a second, everything went silent. Then the guardian spoke again. But this time, Mark could understand. The stranger carries the old blood. The promise must be honored. Mark looked at Zara. She was frozen, her eyes full of shock. What promise? He asked, but the guardian did not answer. Instead, it turned and walked back to the throne. It pointed to the far wall. A door opened. Beyond it, the path continued. Zara stood slowly. She looked at Mark as if seeing him for the first time. Then she whispered, "You are part of this." Mark frowned. Part of what? She pointed at his boots. The old legends spoke of a warrior with strange feet, wrapped in sky-colored cloth, who would one day walk the bones of the dead and lead the last survivors to safety, and now he stood here, with her. They walked through the new path. At the end was a ladder leading to the surface. When they climbed out, they stood on a tall cliff. Below them was a valley, and in that valley were lights, fires, tents, people. Zara gasped. It was her tribe. They were alive. But between the cliff and the valley was a dark canyon, one filled with movement. The raiders had found them too, and now a final battle was coming. He didn't wait for the plan. He didn't wait for words. When Mark saw the raiders moving toward the valley, toward Zara's people, he began running, down the cliffside, through the canyon, straight toward danger. Zara shouted after him, her voice lost in the wind. But he was already gone. The human didn't understand her tribe's customs, or that this canyon was cursed. He didn't know the monsters that had taken her father years ago had come from here. But she knew. This place. This was where fear lived. The canyon walls closed around Mark. Shadows danced. Rocks echoed every step. Then a sound. Click, 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 not metal, not claws. Both. From behind the rocks, long limbs crept out. Silver armor fused with rotten skin. One by one, the creatures emerged. Desert horrors, half dead and half machine. Warlords that raided tribes for sport, left nothing behind but bones. Mark stopped, breathing hard. He was alone, no backup, just one knife, one flare, and a promise to protect. The creatures surrounded him. 4, 5, 7 now. Their teeth glinted, in the dark. Zara watched from above, frozen in horror. Her tribe called these things the Eaters of Names. Once taken by them, no one returned. Mark raised his hands, slowly. Then he lit the flare. Red light filled the canyon. The beasts screamed, their eyes burning, and Mark, he charged. He moved fast, dodging claws, slashing with the knife. One beast fell, another shrieked, but a claw caught his shoulder, ripping through cloth and skin. Blood poured, but he didn't stop. Zara couldn't watch anymore. She turned and ran. At the edge of the valley, the tribe was preparing to move. Again, the elders told everyone to leave the camp before the raiders arrived, but Zara ran into the middle of the gathering, screaming, "They're coming! The monsters from the canyon, they found us!" Her voice cracked, but no one moved. Then she shouted louder, "The human fights them alone!" That got their attention. Whispers turned to murmurs. The stranger? The one from the sky? Back in the canyon, Mark fell to one knee. Blood stained the sand. His knife broke in half. A creature stood over him, mouth wide, ready to bite. Then, a rock smashed into its face. Zara. She had returned. She stood above him, holding a crystal weapon from the ruin. Behind her, others came, warriors from her tribe, young and old. Some held spears, some held fire. All followed her lead. The monsters hissed, but now they were outnumbered. The tribe attacked. Screams filled the canyon. Sand turned to dust. The creatures fought hard, but the tribe fought harder. And in the middle of the chaos, Zara and Mark fought side by side. Her moves were quick, graceful like a desert wind. His were brutal, raw like earth-born thunder. Two warriors. One fate. At last the final beast fell. Silence. Only the wind remained. Zara helped Mark to his feet. His arm bled, but he smiled. "You came back," he whispered. She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "You fought like my father." The tribe gathered around them. One elder stepped forward. He studied Mark's torn boots. Then he knelt. "The one from the stars," he said in his own tongue. "The protector has come." Zara looked at Mark. Then she did something no one expected. She bowed. The girl once left in the sand now stood before her people, not as a child, but as a leader, and by her side, the human who fought what her clan feared most. He didn't remember falling. He only remembered the battle, the roar of beasts, the red flare in his hand, Zara's scream. Now, he was lying on a soft bed of animal hides, warm, safe. For the first time in days, there was no sand in his mouth, no storm in his face, just quiet wind brushing through a cloth tent. Mark opened his eyes slowly. Zara was sitting beside him. She was different now, not the scared girl he had pulled from the sand. She sat tall, a light wrapped around her like fire. A new cloth marked her shoulders, white with a red handprint, a symbol of bravery in her tribe. When she saw his eyes open, her lips curved into a quiet smile. "Protector," she whispered. Mark blinked, confused. "Protector?" Zara nodded, then she touched her own chest. "You protected me. Now I protect you." She pointed outside the tent. Voices were rising. The whole tribe had returned from hiding. Fires were burning. Songs were being sung. For the Yao. First time in years, the people of the sand had something they thought they had lost forever. Hope. Mark sat up slowly, groaning as pain shot through his side. His wounds were cleaned and wrapped neatly. Someone had cared for him through the night. Zara poured him water and placed a small bowl of food in front of him. It smelled strange, but his stomach growled. He took a bite. Sweet. Soft. Made from ground roots and desert fruit. He smiled. "Better than protein bars." She tilted her head. "Bars?" He chuckled, chewing. Later, Zara led him outside. The sun was low, casting golden light over the sand. Children ran between tents. Elders sat in circles, painting the battle on long pieces of cloth. Warriors sharpened blades and told tales of the human who had fought like thunder. Everyone watched him as he passed. Some nodded, some bowed. One small child ran up and touched his hand. "You wear the boots of legend," she said, eyes wide. Zara held Mark's hand firmly, guiding him to the main gathering fire. The elder chief stood there, face weathered like stone, his eyes deep as the dunes. He raised his hands. "The protector has risen from the storm, the one who faced death without fear, the one who walks where even our gods did not dare." Mark stood silently, unsure what to say. Then the chief looked at Zara, and the daughter of the lost line stands with him. The people gasped. Zara dropped to one knee. Mark looked at her, confused. She took a deep breath. Then, in her own tongue, she said, "He is my chosen. He is Katal, my protector, my promise." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Mark leaned toward her. "What did you say?" Zara looked up, her eyes shining with tears and fire. "I gave you my name," she whispered. "Now I give you my people." That night Mark sat beside the fire, watching as the stars filled the sky. Zara sat next to him, shoulders touching. He stared at the twin moons above and whispered, "Didn't think I'd end up here." Zara looked at him, confused. He smiled. "I was just trying to fix a broken ship. Now I'm something else." She placed her hand on his chest. "Protector," she said again. "To me, to my brother, to all." Mark felt something stir in him. This world had nearly killed him, but now it had given him a name. Not just a name, a purpose. As the fire burned low, a young warrior approached. There's movement beyond the dunes, he said. Raiders, again. Zira stood immediately. Prepare the scouts. Mark stood too, despite the pain. Zira turned to him. You need rest. He shook his head. I fight with you. She stared at him, heart pounding. Then she smiled. My protector. They walked side by side, one from the stars, one from the sand. Mark's boots left deep tracks across the golden dunes. Zara walked beside him, barefoot, her steps light but certain. Behind them the tribe followed quietly. Warriors, elders, children. All eyes were fixed on the horizon, because this time they weren't running from danger. They were walking toward it. At the edge of the canyon, the raiders waited. Not just monsters, not just machines, but organized, armored invaders, tall, cruel figures with glowing red eyes and weapons that pulsed like thunder. They had followed the tribe for moons. Now they stood in formation, ready to strike. Zara stepped forward, lifting her staff. Mark drew in a breath. He'd never seen her this way before. She stood like a queen carved from fire and stone. She turned to him. This is where we end it. Mark looked at his broken blade, then at the people behind him, people who had given him a name, food, care, purpose. He nodded. Then let's end it together. The wind howled. Sand twisted in the air. A war cry rose from the tribe. Mark ran with them. His body still ached from wounds, but his heart was strong. Zara moved beside him like lightning, her staff glowing with desert energy. They clashed with the raiders. Steel against crystal, fire against sand. Mark ducked beneath a swinging blade, then tackled a raider to the ground. He picked up its fallen weapon, heavy and strange, and swung hard. The blast knocked two more enemies back. Zira spun in a circle, her staff cracking the ground. A wave of heat burst out, sending shock through the enemy line. The battle raged. Then, Mark saw it. One of the elders was surrounded. A raider raised its blade high. Mark ran, pushing through pain, and dove in front. The weapon sliced down, into his shoulder. Blood spilled, but the elder was safe. Mark fell to one knee, gasping. The world spun. He looked up and saw Zara. Her scream broke the sky. She charged the raider with fire in her eyes, striking faster than he'd ever seen. The raider fell, then another and another. She ran to him. Mark. No, stay with me. He tried to smile. Still, here, just tired. She pressed her forehead to his. You gave everything, he whispered. So did you. The tribe won. Not because they had stronger weapons, but because they fought for something greater than survival. They fought for each other. As the sun rose behind them, the remaining raiders fled. Zara knelt beside Mark, tears on her cheeks. She tore cloth from her robe and pressed it to his wound. You're not dying today, she whispered. Mark laughed weakly. Guess I'm not going home either. Zara looked down. Then slowly, she lifted a small necklace from her pouch. It was simple, strung with desert stones and a single clear crystal. She tied it around his neck. Now, this is your home. Days later, the tribe gathered on the high cliffs where the stars were brightest. They lit fires and told stories of the battle. Children danced in circles, pretending to be Zara and Mark. The elders painted their story into the sacred cloth, forever remembered. Zara sat beside Mark, who now wore robes like her people. He still had his boots, but they were no longer strange. Now they were honored. She turned to him. Do you know what that necklace means? He shook his head. It means you are part of the clan, blood or not. She took his hand. It also means you are mine. Mark stared at her. Like, your protector? She smiled gently. Yes, but more. He squeezed her hand. Good. Because I don't want to leave. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You were buried in our sands, but you were never a stranger. You were written in our story long before I met you. And so the legend grew. Of the girl left for dead, of the storm that swallowed her, of the human who rose from dust, fought beasts, saved a people, and earned not only their trust, but their hearts. Together, they carved a new path, and on the dunes of Zareth, where once only bones remained, the winds now whispered a different tale, the tale of the protector and the girl who called him home.